Jimin forced Jungkook to leave and forget their love. But years later, Jimin discovers a devastating secret that changes everything they knew. Jungkook, if you ever loved me, get out of this house and never come back. Jimin's voice cracked through the apartment like a gunshot, but Jungkook did not move. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the city beyond the glass into a blur of silver lights and shadows. The clock on the wall showed 2:17 a.m., yet neither Jimin nor Jungkook had slept for days. Jungkook stood near the front door with one hand wrapped around the handle of his suitcase, his knuckles pale from how tightly he was gripping it. His black coat was soaked from the rain, droplets sliding from his hair onto his cheeks, but he seemed unaware of the cold. "Say it again," Jungkook whispered. Jimin looked away. "Leave. Look at me and say it." Jimin's fingers trembled beside his body. He had rehearsed this moment for 3 weeks, repeating the same words every night until they became a weapon sharp enough to destroy everything he loved. But hearing Jungkook ask for them made the weapon cut through Jimin instead. "Leave, Jungkook." Jungkook stared at him for several seconds. There was no anger in Jungkook's eyes anymore. That was what frightened Jimin most. There had been anger earlier, then confusion, then desperation. Now there was only a terrible emptiness. "Did I do something?" Jungkook asked. Jimin swallowed. "No." "Then why?" "Because this has to end." "Why?" "Because I said so." Jungkook laughed once, but the sound was painfully hollow. "That isn't an answer, Jimin." Jimin turned toward the kitchen because he knew if he kept looking at Jungkook, he would break. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, and the cedarwood candle Jungkook always lit whenever Jimin couldn't sleep. That candle had become one of the little habits that made their home feel like home. Jungkook used to light it every night. Jimin used to pretend he hated the smell, even though he secretly loved it because it reminded him of Jungkook. Now the scent felt unbearable. "You deserve someone better," Jimin said. "Someone who won't destroy your life." "You don't get to decide what I deserve." Jungkook stepped closer. "You don't get to throw away 2 years because you're suddenly afraid." Jimin's heart slammed against his ribs. "I'm not afraid." "You're lying." "I'm not." "Then look at me." Jimin couldn't. Jungkook came closer until only a few inches separated them. "Jimin," his voice softened. "Whatever happened, tell me. If you're angry, I'll listen. If you're hurt, I'll stay. If you're scared, I'll hold you until you're not scared anymore. But don't stand there and tell me you stopped loving me when I can see you shaking." Jimin's eyes burned. He pressed his nails into his palms to keep himself from reaching for Jungkook. "I don't love you anymore." Silence. The words seemed to drain the warmth from the room. Jungkook's expression changed so slowly that Jimin wished he could look away, but he forced himself to watch. First disbelief, then pain, then something resembling acceptance. Jungkook nodded once. "Okay." That single word almost destroyed Jimin. "Okay," Jimin repeated. "That's all you have to say." "What do you want me to say?" Jungkook asked. "That I don't believe you, that I think you're lying, that I'm going to beg you until you change your mind." His eyes glistened. "I could do that. I could stay here all night and beg you, Jimin, but if you've decided I'm no longer the person you want, I won't force you to love me." Jimin bit the inside of his cheek so hard he tasted blood. "Then go." Jungkook slowly picked up his suitcase. Before opening the door, he stopped. "I'll forget you if that's what you want." Jimin closed his eyes. "Yes." Jungkook's hand remained on the door. "But I'll never understand you." "You don't have to." "I wish you had trusted me enough to tell me the truth." Jimin's breath caught. For one terrifying second, he almost confessed everything. Almost told Jungkook about the phone call, about the photographs, about the threat, about the man who had promised to ruin Jungkook if Jimin refused to disappear. Almost. But Jimin had spent weeks convincing himself that protecting Jungkook meant becoming the person Jungkook would hate. So he remained silent. The door opened. Cold air rushed into the apartment. Jungkook stepped into the hallway. Then he turned one last time. "Goodbye, Jimin." Jimin's lips trembled. "Goodbye, Jungkook." The door closed. Jimin remained standing there until he heard the elevator descend. Only then did his knees give out. He collapsed onto the floor, covering his mouth to silence the sob that tore from his chest. "I'm sorry," Jimin whispered to the empty apartment. "I'm so sorry, Jungkook." He reached for the phone hidden beneath a cushion on the sofa. The screen showed 17 missed calls from an unknown number. One new message appeared. Jimin opened it with shaking fingers. "You did the right thing." If you tell Jungkook the truth, he will die. Jimin stared at the words until they blurred behind his tears. 3 years passed. Jimin learned how to live with silence. At least, that was what he told everyone. He changed apartments, changed his phone number, stopped visiting the cafe where he and Jungkook used to spend Sunday mornings, and packed every photograph of them into a wooden box he kept beneath his bed. He developed strange habits. Whenever he was nervous, he counted the cracks in the ceiling. Whenever he couldn't sleep, he made tea he never drank. Whenever someone said Jungkook's name, Jimin smiled as if the name belonged to someone he had never known. But memories did not obey rules. They appeared in the smallest places. A song playing in a taxi, the smell of cedarwood, a black coat hanging beside a doorway, rain against a window at 2 in the morning. Jungkook existed everywhere Jimin tried to erase him. Meanwhile, Jungkook had disappeared from Jimin's life completely. No messages, no calls, no mutual friends carrying news. Nothing. Jimin convinced himself that this was good. It meant Jungkook was safe. It meant the threat had worked. It meant Jungkook was alive. Then one evening, Jimin received an envelope with no return address. He found it beneath his apartment door when he came home. There was only one word written on the front in black ink: Jimin. His stomach tightened. He locked the door before opening it. Inside was a photograph. Jimin nearly dropped it. It showed Jungkook standing outside a hospital 3 years earlier, the same night Jimin had forced him to leave. On the back of the photograph was a sentence that made Jimin's blood run cold. You were never told what happened after he left. Jimin stared at the photograph for a long time. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. His hands shook as he answered. Hello, no one spoke. Who is this? A man's voice finally emerged from the darkness. You wanted Jungkook to forget you. Jimin froze. Who are you? You should have asked what happened to Jungkook after that night. Jimin's heartbeat became deafening. Where is he? The man laughed quietly. That's the question you should have been asking for 3 years. Jimin gripped the photograph until its edges bent. Tell me where Jungkook is. Before I tell you, Jimin, there's something you need to understand. The voice became colder. Jungkook didn't leave you because you broke his heart. Jimin stopped breathing. What are you talking about? He left because someone made sure he would never be able to come back. The call ended. Jimin stood motionless in the dark apartment, the photograph trembling between his fingers. For 3 years, Jimin had believed he had destroyed their love to save Jungkook. For 3 years, he had carried the guilt alone. But now, for the first time, a terrifying possibility entered his mind. Maybe Jimin had never been the one controlling their separation. Maybe someone else had been pulling the strings from the beginning. And somewhere beyond the rain-covered windows, the truth about Jungkook was still waiting for him. The photograph slipped from Jimin's fingers and landed face down on the floor, but he barely noticed. His mind was still trapped inside the voice from the phone call. Jungkook didn't leave you because you broke his heart. Someone made sure he would never be able to come back. Jimin crouched slowly and picked up the photograph. His hands were shaking so badly that the paper rattled between his fingers. He turned it over again. The image showed Jungkook standing outside a hospital beneath a broken street lamp, his face pale, his black coat soaked through. Jimin recognized the hospital immediately. It was the same hospital where his mother had once been treated, the same place Jimin had visited on the night he received the first threatening message 3 years ago. No, Jimin whispered. That's impossible. His phone rang again. Jimin nearly dropped the photograph. The same unknown number appeared on the screen. He answered without speaking. You found the picture. Jimin's jaw tightened. Who are you? Someone who knows what you sacrificed. Then tell me the truth. A pause followed. You still think you saved Jungkook, don't you? Jimin closed his eyes. I know I did. You don't know anything. The call ended. Jimin stared at the dark screen. For years, he had remembered that night in perfect detail. Jungkook had arrived at their apartment around midnight. He had been smiling at first, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a small paper bag containing the strawberry cake Jimin loved. Then Jimin had seen the envelope waiting on the kitchen counter. Inside were photographs of Jungkook leaving work, entering their apartment, walking beside Jimin, even sleeping in the passenger seat of Jimin's car. There had been a handwritten note beneath them. Leave him or he dies. Jimin had believed the threat because the final photograph showed Jungkook from a distance, with a red circle drawn around his head. Jimin had never told Jungkook. Instead, he had broken his own heart and forced Jungkook to walk away. But now the hospital photograph suggested there had been something else. Something Jimin had never seen. He rushed to his bedroom and dragged the wooden box from beneath the bed. Dust scattered across the floor. Inside were old photographs, movie tickets, dried flowers, handwritten notes, and one small silver key Jungkook had given him on their first anniversary. Jimin had kept everything. His fingers moved through the memories until he found the old phone he had used 3 years earlier. The battery was dead, but after several minutes connected to a charger, the screen flickered awake. Hundreds of forgotten messages appeared. Jimin scrolled through them slowly. Most were harmless. Then he found the conversation he had almost forgotten. Unknown, you have 48 hours. Jimin, what do you want? Unknown, Jungkook gone. Jimin, if I leave him, you'll leave him alone. Unknown, yes. Jimin, promise. Unknown, you have my word. Jimin stared at the messages. Something felt wrong. He continued scrolling. There was another message sent 30 minutes after Jungkook had left. Unknown, thank you for making this easy. Jimin's breathing stopped. He had never seen that message before. His old phone had been wiped shortly afterward, but somehow the conversation had survived. Thank you for making this easy. Jimin repeated the words under his breath. Why would the person threatening Jungkook say that? What had been made easy? Jimin suddenly remembered something else. That night just after Jungkook left, Jimin had heard a car engine outside. He had assumed it belonged to a neighbor, but now he remembered the headlights. A dark sedan had remained parked across the street for nearly 20 minutes. Jimin grabbed his coat and ran outside. Rain had begun again, thin and cold. He stood beneath the apartment building's awning and looked toward the street. 3 years ago, there had been a security camera above the entrance. If the recording still existed, perhaps they could show who had been watching them. Jimin hurried to the building manager's office. The old manager recognized him immediately. Mr. Park. Do you still have security footage from 3 years ago? The manager frowned. 3 years, please. Something in Jimin's voice made the older man hesitate. After several minutes, he searched the archive system. Most files had been automatically deleted, but one external drive remained. This is strange, the manager said. Someone specifically requested that this footage be preserved. Jimin's stomach tightened. Who? The manager looked at the file information. I don't know. The request was made anonymously. Jimin stared at the monitor. Can I see it? The footage loaded. The screen showed the apartment entrance 3 years earlier. Jimin watched himself leave the building briefly at 1:43 a.m. Then Jungkook appeared at 2:19 a.m. He walked toward the entrance carrying a paper bag. Jimin remembered that moment. He remembered Jungkook coming home with cake. But then another figure appeared. A man in a dark coat stood across the street. Jimin leaned closer. The footage was grainy, but the man was clearly watching the building. Then Jungkook entered. 20 minutes later, Jimin appeared at the entrance. He walked outside, looked around, then returned. At 2:58 a.m., Jungkook left with his suitcase. The mysterious man remained across the street, but he wasn't alone. A second person stepped out of the sedan. Jimin froze. He recognized the posture, the way the person moved, the slight tilt of the head. No, Jimin whispered. The manager looked at him. Do you know him? Jimin couldn't answer. The second man turned toward the camera for one brief moment. His face became visible. Jimin felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. He knew that face. He had trusted that man. He had invited him into their home. He had told him everything about his relationship with Jungkook. The man was someone who had been close to both of them, someone who had comforted Jimin after the breakup. Someone who had repeatedly told Jimin that leaving Jungkook was the right decision. That's impossible, Jimin whispered. The manager paused the footage. Should I call the police? No, Jimin's answer came too quickly. He stared at the frozen image. Not yet. Why? Because I need to know what happened to Jungkook first. Jimin left the building with one thought burning through his mind. If that man had been involved from the beginning, then every piece of advice Jimin had received might have been part of the same lie. Every warning, every threat, every coincidence, every reason Jimin believed Jungkook was safer without him. Jimin returned home and searched through his old messages again. There was one number he had never questioned because he had believed it belonged to someone helping him. The number had sent him instructions during the final weeks before the breakup. Jimin had saved it under the name M. He had assumed it belonged to the mysterious person threatening him. But now he opened the contact information. The number had been saved 3 years ago. Jimin compared the last 4 digits with the phone number of the person he had trusted. They matched. His hands went numb. It was you. A knock came from the front door. Jimin froze. Another knock. 3 slow taps. Jimin approached the door without making a sound. Who is it? Silence. Then a voice came through the wood. His blood turned cold. He knew that voice. He had heard it every day for years. He stepped backward. No, the voice came again. Open the door. Jimin stared at the handle, unable to breathe. It was impossible. It couldn't be him. Not after 3 years. Not after everything. Jimin, the voice whispered. It's Jungkook. Jimin's hand moved toward the door, trembling violently. He stopped inches from the handle. The photograph on the floor suddenly caught his eye. Jungkook outside the hospital. The warning, the mysterious caller, the hidden footage, every piece of the puzzle seemed to point toward the same horrifying truth. Jimin had spent 3 years believing Jungkook was gone because of him, but Jungkook was standing on the other side of his door, and before Jimin could open it, Jungkook spoke again. Please don't be afraid of me. Jimin closed his eyes as tears finally escaped. Jungkook, his voice broke. What happened to you? There was silence on the other side. Then Jungkook answered quietly. I came back because I finally remembered who destroyed us. I came back because I finally remembered who destroyed us. Jimin stared at the door, his hand still hovering over the handle, his entire body trembling as though the words had reached inside his chest and pulled something loose. For 3 years, he had imagined Jungkook's voice in his dreams, in crowded streets, in quiet rooms, in the moments just before sleep. But this was not a dream. Jungkook was standing outside, alive. Real. Close enough that Jimin could hear the uneven rhythm of his breathing through the door. Jimin slowly unlocked it. The door opened a few inches. Jungkook stood beneath the dim hallway light, thinner than Jimin remembered, his dark hair falling over his forehead, a faint scar running from beneath his right ear toward his jaw. His eyes were the same. That was the cruelest part. Jimin had spent 3 years trying to forget those eyes, yet one glance brought every memory rushing back. Jungkook looked at Jimin without saying anything. Jimin's lips parted but no sound came. Jungkook's gaze moved over his face, studying him carefully, as though he needed to make sure Jimin was really standing there. You look tired, Jungkook whispered. Jimin laughed through a sob. You disappear for 3 years and that's the first thing you say? Jungkook's expression softened. I didn't know what else to say. Jimin opened the door wider. Come in. Jungkook hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than Jimin expected. Once, Jungkook would have walked into the apartment without knocking. Once, this place had belonged to both of them. Now Jungkook entered as a stranger. He placed his coat over the back of a chair. Jimin noticed that Jungkook still folded his sleeves twice before sitting, exactly as he had always done. Some habits survived even when people did not. Jimin remained standing. Where have you been? Jungkook looked down at his hands. A lot of places. That's not an answer. I know. I spent 3 years thinking you hated me. Jungkook's fingers tightened. I never hated you. Then why didn't you come back? Jungkook looked at him. Because I couldn't. The words were quiet, but something inside Jimin cracked. What does that mean? Jungkook inhaled slowly. It means the night you told me to leave wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of something neither of us understood. Jimin sat across from him. Tell me everything. Jungkook remained silent for several seconds. Then he pulled a folded piece of paper from his wallet and placed it on the table. Jimin opened it. It was a hospital discharge document dated 3 years earlier. Jungkook's name was printed near the top. Jimin stared at it. You were hospitalized. After I left you. Jimin's fingers tightened around the paper. Why? Because someone followed me. Jimin's heart sank. Who? I didn't know at first. Jungkook leaned back, staring toward the rain-covered window. I drove for almost an hour that night. I was angry. I was hurt. I kept replaying what you said. I thought maybe if I drove long enough, I could convince myself that you meant it. His voice became quieter. Then another car started following me. Jimin swallowed. The sedan. Jungkook looked at him sharply. You saw it. The security footage. Jungkook nodded slowly. So you finally found it. Found what? Proof. Jimin leaned forward. Jungkook, please. Jungkook closed his eyes. The car forced mine toward the side of the road. I lost control. I remember the sound of metal twisting. Then everything went black. Jimin covered his mouth. You almost died. Yes. Tears gathered in Jimin's eyes. How didn't I know? Because someone made sure you didn't. Jimin stood abruptly and began packing. Who? The same person who threatened you. You know who it was. I know now. Jungkook reached into his bag and removed another photograph. This one showed a man entering the hospital 3 years ago. Jimin recognized him immediately. His stomach turned. No, Jungkook watched his expression. You know him. He was my friend. He was mine too. Jimin stared at the photograph. Why would he do this? Because he wanted something neither of us realized we had. What? Jungkook shook his head. Control. Jimin frowned. That doesn't make sense. It will. Jungkook took out a small recording device. Listen. He pressed a button. Static filled the room, then a familiar voice emerged. Jimin will believe anything if he thinks Jungkook is in danger. Jimin's face went pale. The voice continued. He'll sacrifice himself. That's the weakness. Jimin's hand flew to his chest. He knew the voice. Every word. Every breath. It belonged to the man he had trusted. Turn it off, Jimin whispered. Jungkook stopped the recording. He manipulated you because he knew you would protect me. Jimin sank into the chair. But why? Because he wanted access to something my family owned. What? A company? Jimin stared at him. You never told me about that. Because I didn't know how much of it mattered. Jungkook rubbed his thumb against the edge of the table, a nervous habit Jimin remembered instantly. Whenever Jungkook was afraid, he rubbed his thumb against his index finger. Jimin had once found it adorable. Now it made his heart ache. My father left behind documents that could expose a financial crime, Jungkook continued. I discovered them shortly before we broke up. Someone found out. And they used me to get to you. Yes, Jimin looked down. So the breakup was manufactured. Jimin closed his eyes. I thought I was saving you. I know. I thought if I made you hate me, you'd stay alive. Jungkook's expression softened. I know. Jimin looked at him through tears. Then why didn't you tell me? Because after the accident, I couldn't remember everything. Jimin froze. What? I suffered memory loss. Jungkook touched the scar beneath his ear. There were months when I couldn't remember your face. I knew there had been someone important, but I couldn't remember who. Jimin's breathing became shallow. And now I remember. Everything. Jungkook looked directly into his eyes. Almost. Jimin's heart pounded. What's missing? Jungkook hesitated. The last conversation before the accident. What do you mean? I remember you telling me to leave. I remember the rain. I remember the car following me. But there is one moment I can't recover. What moment? Someone called me before the crash. Jimin stared at him. Who? I don't know. Jungkook looked toward the window. But the doctors found a damaged phone in the wreckage. The call history was erased. Jimin suddenly remembered the old phone in his bedroom. Wait. He stood and hurried down the hallway. Jungkook followed. Jimin opened the wooden box and pulled out the old phone. I found something tonight. He showed Jungkook the messages. Jungkook read them carefully. When he reached the final message, his expression changed. Thank you for making this easy. That's what I thought too, Jimin said. What? This message wasn't sent to you. Jimin frowned. What? Jungkook pointed at the timestamp. Look at the time. Jimin stared. 2:58. That's when I left. Yes, but look at the number. Jimin zoomed in. The number was different from the one that had sent the previous threats. His blood ran cold. There were two people. Jungkook nodded. Exactly. Jimin looked at him. One person threatened me, another person was waiting for you. And we assumed they were the same person. Because someone wanted us to. Silence filled the room. Jimin sat on the edge of the bed. 3 years. His voice cracked. We lost 3 years because of a lie. Jungkook sat beside him but didn't touch him. The distance between them felt enormous despite their proximity. We can't get those years back. Jimin wiped his eyes. No, Jungkook looked at him. But we can stop losing more. Jimin finally turned toward him. Their eyes met. For the first time in 3 years, there was no locked door between them, no threat, no lie, no carefully rehearsed goodbye. There was only the truth, painful and incomplete, but finally alive. Jimin whispered, I never stopped loving you. Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. I know. How? Because I remembered one thing before everything else. Jimin waited. Jungkook smiled sadly. The way you looked at me when you thought I wasn't watching. Jimin's breath caught. You always looked at me like I was something you were afraid to lose. Jimin lowered his head as tears fell onto his hands. I was. Jungkook slowly reached across the space between them. He stopped before touching Jimin, giving him the choice. Jimin looked at Jungkook's hand, then placed his own hand into it. Their fingers intertwined. Neither spoke. Outside, the rain continued falling, but for the first time in 3 years, Jimin did not feel alone. The truth had not healed them. It had only opened the wound they had buried. But now they finally knew where the wound came from. And together, Jimin and Jungkook began looking through everything they had once been too afraid to question, determined to uncover the entire truth behind the night that had stolen their love from them. Jimin woke before sunrise with Jungkook's hand still loosely wrapped around his. For a few seconds he forgot the last 3 years existed. He saw the familiar curve of Jungkook's shoulder beneath the gray blanket, heard the quiet rhythm of his breathing, and felt the warmth of the hand he had once held every morning. Then reality returned. The old photographs were scattered across the floor. The damaged phone sat beside the bed. The hospital document lay open on the desk. And 3 years of unanswered questions waited for them. Jimin slowly pulled his hand away. Jungkook opened his eyes. You didn't sleep. Neither did you. Jungkook smiled faintly. I was afraid I'd wake up and you wouldn't be here. The confession struck Jimin harder than he expected. I'm not going anywhere. Jungkook looked at him carefully. Don't promise things you can't control. Jimin lowered his eyes. You're right. He picked up the old phone. We need to find out who made that second call. Jungkook sat up. There's someone who might help. Who? The doctor who treated me after the accident. Jimin looked at the hospital document. You remember him, not his face, but I remember his name. They drove to the hospital just after 7. The morning air smelled of wet pavement and coffee from a small cafe near the entrance. Jimin noticed Jungkook staring at the building. Are you okay? I don't know. Jungkook touched the scar beneath his ear. I remember waking up here. I remember the ceiling, the smell of antiseptic, someone asking me my name. He paused. Then I remember asking about you. Jimin's chest tight. What did they tell you? They said no one had come. Jimin stopped walking. But I did. Jungkook looked at him. You came. The morning after your accident, I was told you weren't here. Who told you? Jimin opened his mouth, then stopped. He remembered. The same person who had helped him after the breakup had told him Jungkook had left the city. He had believed it. The man behind everything, Jimin whispered. Jungkook nodded. Exactly. They found the doctor in a quiet office overlooking the hospital courtyard. He was older now, his hair almost completely gray, but his eyes sharpened when he saw Jungkook. I wondered when you would return. Jungkook sat down slowly. You remember me. I remember every patient who survived something they shouldn't have survived. The doctor glanced at Jimin. And I remember him. Jimin's heart stopped. You saw me. You came here the morning after the accident. Then why did someone tell me Jungkook wasn't here? The doctor's expression hardened. Because someone ordered the staff not to give you information. Jungkook leaned forward. Who? The doctor opened a drawer and removed a sealed envelope. I kept this because I knew one day you'd come looking for answers. Jimin stared at it. What's inside? A copy of the security report from the night of the accident. Jungkook opened the envelope. The report showed that someone had entered Jungkook's hospital room several hours after surgery. The visitor had no authorization. Jimin's pulse quickened. Who was it? The doctor's expression was grim. We don't know. There was no camera. There was. He placed another document on the desk. But the recording was deleted. Jimin and Jungkook exchanged a look. Again, Jimin whispered. The doctor nodded. But the nurse on duty remembered something. What? The visitor asked about your relationship. Jungkook's face hardened. Why? Because he wanted to know whether you had told Jimin anything before the accident. Jimin felt cold despite the warmth of the room. Anything about what? The doctor looked directly at Jungkook. Your father's documents. Silence. Jungkook's jaw tightened. So they knew. Yes. The doctor handed him another piece of paper. There is something else. Jungkook unfolded it. A handwritten note appeared. If he RMBRS find the black box. Jimin frowned. Black box. The doctor shook his head. I don't know what it means. Jungkook stared at the note. I do. Jimin turned toward him. What? My father used to call his private archive the black box. Where is it? Jungkook's expression changed. I don't know. Then how do you know it exists? Because when I was a child, my father told me that if something ever happened to him, I should never trust anyone who asked about it. Jimin stood. And you never told me. Jungkook looked ashamed. I forgot. Because of the accident. Yes, they left the hospital carrying the documents. In the parking lot, Jungkook suddenly stopped. Jimin, what? We're being followed. Jimin looked into the side mirror. A gray sedan stood at the end of the street. A model, the same dark windows. His stomach dropped. Don't look directly at it. Jungkook nodded. They got into the car. Jimin started the engine and pulled away slowly. The sedan followed. What do we do? Jimin asked. Drive. They turned onto a crowded road. The sedan remained behind them. Jimin's hands tightened around the steering wheel. Where? The old warehouse. Why? Because if they're following us, they'll expect us to go somewhere safe. Jimin glanced at him. And the warehouse isn't safe. Exactly. They drove toward the industrial district. The city slowly disappeared behind them. Buildings became warehouses, streets became empty, and the rain returned. The gray sedan remained several cars behind. Jimin parked beside an abandoned factory. Now what? Jungkook looked at him. Wait, 10 minutes passed. The sedan drove past the factory. Jimin exhaled. Maybe we lost them. Jungkook shook his head. No, he pointed toward the rearview mirror. There. A second vehicle appeared from the opposite direction. Jimin's heart raced. 2 cars. Jungkook opened the glove compartment and pulled out a small flashlight. There may be another entrance. They ran through the side door of the abandoned factory. The air smelled of rust, dust, and wet concrete. Their footsteps echoed through the empty building. Jimin's breathing became rapid. Jungkook, keep moving. I can't see. Jungkook grabbed his wrist. I'm here. They reached a narrow staircase and climbed. Behind them, a door slammed open. Someone had entered the factory. Jimin and Jungkook froze. Voices echoed below. They're inside. Jungkook whispered, don't make a sound. Jimin pressed against the wall beside him. He could feel Jungkook's heartbeat through their joined hands. Footsteps approached. One step, then another. The sound grew louder. Suddenly, Jungkook pulled Jimin into a dark storage room and closed the door. They stood inches apart in complete darkness. Jimin could hear his own breathing. Jungkook's hand rested gently against Jimin's waist to keep him from moving. Outside, someone walked past. Search upstairs. A second voice answered, they have the documents. Jimin's eyes widened. Jungkook leaned closer. They know. The footsteps faded. Jimin whispered, what do we do? Jungkook looked toward the small window. We find the black box before they do. Where? Jungkook took out the handwritten note. Under the message were 3 numbers that neither of them had noticed before. 110417. Jimin stared at them. A date? Jungkook shook his head. No, his expression changed. An address. Jimin looked at him. How do you know? Jungkook slowly smiled for the first time that morning. Because my father used to take me there when I was a child. Jimin's heart raced. Where is it? Jungkook looked toward the darkness beyond the window. The house where I grew up. They escaped through the rear entrance and returned to the car after the pursuers moved deeper into the factory. As Jimin drove away, Jungkook held the documents against his chest. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, Jimin asked, what are you afraid we'll find? Jungkook looked out the window. Proof that my father wasn't the man I thought he was. Jimin glanced at him. And what if he wasn't? Then everything I've spent my life believing is a lie. Jimin reached across the center console and squeezed Jungkook's hand. Then we'll face it together. Jungkook looked down at their intertwined fingers. Together. Yes. Jungkook smiled faintly. You know, Jimin, 3 years ago I thought losing you was the worst thing that could happen to me. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. And now, Jungkook looked ahead. Now I think the worst thing would be finding out we could have saved each other sooner. Jimin had no answer. The road stretched before them beneath a sky heavy with clouds. Neither noticed the black vehicle that had quietly joined the traffic several cars behind them. Inside it, someone watched their car disappear around the corner and whispered into a phone, they're going to the old house. A pause followed. Then we go there first. The old house appeared at the end of the road like a memory that had refused to die. Its windows were dark, its garden swallowed by weeds, and the wooden gate hung crooked from a single rusted hinge. Jimin slowed the car until it stopped beneath a row of ancient trees. Jungkook stared through the windshield without moving. I haven't been here since my father's funeral. Jimin looked at him. Are you sure you want to go inside? Jungkook nodded. although his fingers had already begun rubbing nervously against his thumb. "No," Jimin waited, "but I need to." They stepped through the gate. Wet leaves stuck to Jimin's shoes as they crossed the overgrown path. The house smelled of damp wood and dust when Jungkook pushed the front door open. Nothing moved. No lights. No footsteps. Only the faint creaking of the floor beneath them. Jungkook walked slowly through the hallway, touching the walls as though the house itself were trying to return memories to him. "My room was upstairs," Jimin followed. "Do you remember anything?" "Fragments." Jungkook stopped beside an old staircase. "My father used to lock one room downstairs. He told me never to enter it. The black box. Maybe." They descended into the basement. A single bulb flickered above them. Jungkook found an old wooden door at the far end. It had no handle, only a small metal plate with numbers engraved into it. 110417. Jimin's breath caught. The code. Jungkook entered the numbers. There was a click. The door opened. Inside was a room barely large enough for two people. Metal cabinets covered the walls. Boxes filled the shelves. Old photographs, contracts, bank records, handwritten journals, and computer drives were arranged with disturbing precision. Jimin whispered, "This is it." Jungkook stepped inside. His face had gone pale. "My father kept everything." They searched for nearly an hour. Every document revealed another piece of a hidden world: secret payments, offshore accounts, names of executives, photographs of meetings that had never been publicly acknowledged. Then Jimin found a folder bearing his own name. His hands froze. "Jungkook." Jungkook turned. "What?" Jimin held up the folder. "Why is my name here?" Jungkook took it carefully. Inside were photographs of Jimin taken years before he had ever met Jungkook. Jimin walking home, Jimin entering a cafe, Jimin sitting alone in a park. There were dozens of them. Jimin felt sick. "Someone was watching me before we even met." Jungkook's face hardened. "My father knew about you." "How?" Jungkook turned another page. There was a report dated 5 years earlier. Subject: Park Jimin, potential connection to the archive. Jimin stared at the words. "I wasn't connected to anything. You might have been without knowing it." Jungkook read the next page. "Your father worked for one of my father's companies." Jimin looked up sharply. "My father?" "Yes." Jimin stepped backward. "That's impossible. My father was an accountant." "An accountant who handled private financial records." Jungkook looked at the documents. He may have known about the black box. Jimin felt the room spin. Memories began returning. His father had always been secretive about his work. He had once told Jimin never to open the locked cabinet in his study. Jimin had assumed it was ordinary paperwork. After his father's death, the cabinet had disappeared. Someone had removed it before Jimin returned home from the funeral. "Jungkook," Jimin whispered. "Someone knew my father too." Before Jungkook could answer, they heard a noise upstairs. Both froze. A floorboard creaked, then another. Someone was inside the house. Jungkook quietly closed the cabinet. "Turn off the light." Jimin switched it off. Darkness swallowed the basement. They heard footsteps above them, slow, deliberate. Jimin's breathing became shallow. Jungkook reached for his hand. "Stay behind me." "No." "Jimin, I'm not leaving you again." Jungkook looked at him in the darkness. Something emotional passed through his eyes. "Okay." The footsteps stopped directly above the basement door. A shadow moved beneath it. Then the door began to open. Jungkook pulled Jimin behind a cabinet. The door opened slowly. A man entered holding a flashlight. The beam swept across the room. Jimin recognized the voice before he saw the face. "You really should have stayed away." Jimin's blood froze. Jungkook stepped out. "You." The man smiled. It was the same person from the security footage, the same person Jimin had trusted, the same person who had convinced him that leaving Jungkook was the only way to keep him alive. "I wondered how long it would take you to find this place." Jimin's voice shook. "You threatened me. I protected you. You destroyed us." The man's smile disappeared. "I gave you a choice." Jungkook stepped forward. "You caused the accident." "No." The man's eyes remained cold. "I didn't cause the accident." Jimin stared at him. "Then who did?" The man smiled again. "That's the question, isn't it?" He raised the flashlight toward Jungkook. "You still don't remember everything." Jungkook's jaw tightened. "What am I missing?" "The person who called you before the crash." Jimin looked between them. "Who was it?" The man remained silent. Then he pointed toward the folder in Jimin's hand. "Ask your father." Jimin's face went pale. "My father is dead." "Are you sure?" Silence filled the basement. Jimin's heartbeat stopped for a second. "What did you say?" The man stepped closer. You believed your father died 6 years ago. He did. Then why did he sign documents 3 months ago? Jimin's fingers went numb. Jungkook stared at the man. You're lying. Am I? The man pulled a photograph from his coat and tossed it onto the floor. Jimin bent down and picked it up. The image showed an older man standing outside a small building. Jimin knew that face. Even after 6 years, he knew it. His father's face, alive. Jimin's knees weakened. No, Yunguk caught his arm. Jimin, that's my father, I know. He's alive. The man nodded, and he knows exactly why you and Jungkook were separated. Jimin looked at the photograph again. There was an address printed beneath it, his father's current location. Why are you showing me this? The man looked at Jungkook. Because the game has changed. What game? Jungkook asked. Your father wasn't the only person hiding secrets. He glanced at Jimin. Neither was yours. Jimin's confusion deepened. What does that mean? The man stepped toward the exit. It means the breakup wasn't about protecting Jungkook from me. He paused. It was about protecting both of you from what your fathers did. Then he disappeared through the basement door. Jimin and Jungkook stood in silence. Jimin looked at the photograph in his hand. My father is alive, Jungkook nodded, and we need to find him. Jimin stared at the address. What if he doesn't want to be found? Jungkook took his hand. Then we'll find out why. They hurried out of the house carrying the black box documents with them. But before they reached the car, Jimin noticed something lying beneath the windshield wiper, a white envelope. His name was written across it. Inside was a single photograph of Jimin and Jungkook together taken years ago. On the back, someone had written, "You were never supposed to meet." Jimin stared at the sentence. Jungkook looked over his shoulder. Neither spoke. They finally understood that their love might not have been an accident at all. Someone had been watching Jimin before Jungkook ever entered his life. Someone had known their fathers were connected. And someone had spent years making sure Jimin and Jungkook would never discover why they were brought together in the first place. Someone wanted us to meet, Jimin whispered, staring at the photograph beneath the windshield wiper, and then someone wanted us destroyed. Jungkook took the photograph from his hand and studied it beneath the gray morning light. The picture had been taken at a cafe 5 years earlier, only weeks after they first met. Jimin remembered that afternoon clearly. Jungkook had accidentally spilled coffee onto Jimin's notebook, apologized 7 times, and then bought him another drink even though Jimin insisted it wasn't necessary. They had laughed until the cafe closed. At the time, neither of them knew that someone had been watching. Look at the background, Jungkook said. Jimin leaned closer. Behind them, reflected faintly in the cafe window, stood a man holding a newspaper. His face was turned toward them. That's my father, Jimin said. Jungkook's expression changed. And that's mine. Jimin looked at him. They were there, together. The realization settled between them like a weight. Their first meeting had not been random. Their fathers had been watching. But why? Jimin folded the photograph and placed it inside his coat. We need to find my father, Jungkook nodded. Before whoever sent this realizes we're looking. They drove toward the address printed beneath the photograph. Neither spoke much during the journey. Jimin kept staring at the road while Jungkook reviewed the documents from the black box. The deeper they went into the evidence, the stranger everything became. There were records connecting their fathers to the same private financial network, but there was no proof that either man had committed a crime. Instead, the documents suggested that both had been investigating something together. Jimin, Jungkook said quietly, look at this. He handed over a file. A photograph was clipped to the first page. It showed their fathers standing beside a third man. Jimin's eyes widened. He recognized him immediately. That's the man who threatened me. Jungkook stared at the photograph. Then he knew our fathers. Maybe he worked for them, or against them. Jimin glanced at Jungkook. What does the document say? Jungkook scanned the page. It says they were trying to expose a network that moved money through several companies. So why were they watching us? Maybe because they knew the network would come after their families. Jimin felt a chill. My father knew, yes. Then why did he disappear? Jungkook looked at him. Maybe he was protecting you. Like I thought I was protecting you. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. Jimin reached across the console and took Jungkook's hand. Jungkook squeezed it. We're not doing that again, Jungkook said. What? Keeping secrets because we think we're protecting each other? Jimin nodded. Never again. They arrived at a small coastal town shortly before sunset. The address led them to a modest house overlooking the sea. The place looked ordinary, almost painfully ordinary. A fishing boat rocked in the distance. Wind carried the smell of salt and wet wood through the open windows. Jimin stood outside the gate, unable to move. "He's here." Jungkook touched his shoulder. "I'll stay beside you." Jimin nodded and knocked. Nothing happened. He knocked again. "Dad," silence. Then the door opened slightly. An older man stood behind it. His hair was mostly gray. His face was thinner than Jimin remembered, but there was no mistaking him. Jimin stopped breathing. "Dad." The man stared at his son, his eyes filled with tears. Jimin stepped forward. "You're alive." His father looked at Jungkook. "And you brought him." Jungkook's expression hardened. "You know me. I've known about you for a very long time." Jimin felt anger replacing shock. "Why did you let me believe you were dead?" His father looked away. "Because if you knew I was alive, they would find you." "Who?" "The people who killed your mother's brother, the people who tried to kill Jungkook." Jimin's voice shook. "You knew about the accident. I knew it was coming." Jungkook stepped forward. "Then why didn't you stop it?" Jimin's father lowered his head. "Because I was too late. You could have warned us." "I tried." And froze. "What?" His father looked at him. "The night you broke up with Jungkook, I called you." Jimin stared. "No, you didn't answer." Jimin's mind raced. His old phone had shown an unknown call that night. He had ignored it because he was crying after receiving the threats. "That was you." "Yes." Jimin covered his mouth. "What were you going to tell me?" His father stepped aside. "Come inside." The house was filled with old books, maps, and boxes. On one wall hung photographs of Jimin as a child. Jimin stopped when he saw a photograph of himself with his father and another man. Jungkook recognized the third person. "That's my father." Jimin's father nodded. "Our fathers worked together to expose the network," Jungkook said. "Yes, and the man from the basement, he was their closest associate." Jimin's father looked at him until he betrayed them. Jimin's anger returned. "He threatened me because he believed you possessed something your father had hidden." "What?" His father hesitated. "The final ledger," Jungkook frowned. "The black box contains records, not the most important one." Jimin's father opened an old wooden cabinet. Inside was a small metal box. He placed it on the table. "Your father and Jungkook's father created a duplicate record containing the names of everyone involved." Jungkook stared at the box. "Why didn't they destroy it?" "Because they knew someone would eventually need it." Jimin looked at his father. "Why me?" His father reached into the box and removed a small key. "Because you were the only person they trusted enough to protect it." Jimin frowned. "I don't understand." "You carried it for years without knowing." Jimin stared at him. "What?" His father looked toward Jungkook. "The key was given to Jimin's mother before she died." Jimin's face went pale. "Where is it?" His father smiled sadly. "You already have it." Jimin instinctively touched the chain beneath his shirt. A small silver key hung there. Was the same key Jungkook had given him on their first anniversary. Jimin pulled it out. Jungkook stared at it. "That's the key." Jimin looked between them. "But Jungkook gave this to me." His father nodded. "He did." Jungkook's expression changed. "My father gave me that key when I was 17. Silence filled the room. Jimin looked at the key. "Then why did it end up with me?" His father answered quietly. "Because your fathers planned for you two to protect each other." Jimin's eyes filled with tears. "They knew we would meet." "Yes." Jungkook looked stunned. "They arranged it." "Not your love," Jimin's father said. "Only the meeting." He paused. "What happened afterward was yours." Jimin looked at Jungkook. Their eyes met. For the first time, the idea that their relationship had been manipulated didn't make their love feel less real. It made it feel even more precious. Someone had arranged the first meeting, but no one had arranged the late-night conversations, the laughter, the arguments, the quiet mornings, or the way Jimin had loved Jungkook despite being terrified of losing him. Those things had belonged to them. Suddenly the lights went out. Jimin's father froze. "They're here." Jungkook immediately moved toward the window. "Who?" "The people I've been hiding from." A vehicle stopped outside. Then another. Jimin heard the sound of doors opening. His father's voice became urgent. "The key." "Dad, listen to me, Jimin. The key doesn't open the box." Jungkook looked at him. "Then what does it open?" Jimin's father stared at them both. "A place your fathers built together." Jimin tightened his grip on the key. "Where?" Before his father could answer, glass shattered in the next room. Jungkook grabbed Jimin and pulled him behind the wall. Someone shouted from outside. Give us the key. Jimin's father looked at his son with terrified eyes. You have to leave now. Jimin shook his head. I'm not leaving you again. His father smiled sadly. You already saved me once without knowing it. Jungkook looked toward the back door. We need to move. They rushed through the kitchen as footsteps entered the house. Jimin's father led them toward a hidden passage beneath the floor. Before they disappeared, he grabbed Jimin's arm. Whatever happens, don't trust the man who calls himself your friend. Jimin froze. Why? His father looked at Jungkook. Because he wasn't working alone. Then the door above them slammed open. Voices filled the house. Jimin, Yunguk, and Jimin's father descended into the darkness beneath the house, carrying the key that had connected their families for years. For the first time, Jimin understood that their breakup had never been the true mystery. The real mystery was why their fathers had wanted Jimin and Jungkook to find each other in the first place. And somewhere beneath the earth, hidden behind a door that only their silver key could open, the answer was waiting. The passage beneath the house was so narrow that Jimin could hear every breath Jungkook took beside him. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, each drop echoing through the stone walls. Jimin's father walked ahead with a small flashlight, his shoulders tense as footsteps thundered above them. Keep moving, he whispered. They won't follow us down here. How do you know? Jungkook asked. Jimin's father stopped. Because your father built this passage for the same reason I did. He turned toward them. To give you somewhere to run when there was nowhere else. At the end of the tunnel stood a steel door. Jimin pulled the silver key from around his neck. His fingers trembled as he inserted it into the lock. The mechanism clicked. The door opened. Inside was a small underground room filled with old photographs, documents, and recording equipment. In the center stood a wooden table. On it was an envelope bearing two names, Jimin and Jungkook. Jimin stared at it. They prepared this for us. Jungkook slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from their fathers. They had known the financial network they were investigating would eventually turn against them. They had also known that their families could become targets. The meeting between Jimin and Jungkook had been arranged because their fathers believed their children could eventually uncover what they themselves could not finish. But there was one thing they had never planned for: Jimin and Jungkook falling in love. The letter explained that the silver key opened a hidden archive containing evidence capable of exposing everyone involved. It also contained proof that the man who had manipulated Jimin had betrayed both families. But the final pages revealed something even more painful. Jimin's father had discovered the betrayal before the breakup and had tried to warn Jimin. He had failed. Jungkook's father had attempted to stop the coming attack but had disappeared while protecting the archive. Their father had intentionally abandoned his child. They had been fighting a war their children never knew existed. Jimin's tears fell onto the letter. All those years, he whispered, I thought my father left me. His father stood behind him. I wanted to come back. Jimin turned. Then why didn't you? Because every time I tried, someone got closer to you. Jimin's expression broke. You should have trusted me. His father nodded. I know. Jungkook stepped beside Jimin. We made the same mistake. Jimin looked at him. What? We thought protecting someone meant deciding what they were allowed to know. Jimin lowered his eyes. I did that to you. And I would have done the same thing if I thought it would save you. Jungkook took Jimin's hand. That's why we have to stop. The room fell silent. They gathered the evidence and contacted authorities they could trust. Within days, the hidden documents exposed the network their fathers had spent years investigating. Accounts were frozen. Criminal investigations began. The man who had manipulated Jimin was arrested after authorities discovered recordings, financial transfers, and evidence connecting him to the conspiracy. He eventually admitted that he had threatened Jimin because he knew Jimin would sacrifice himself for Jungkook. He had expected fear to keep them separated forever. He had never understood that the same love he used against them would eventually bring them back together. Jimin's father disappeared from public life again after giving his testimony, but this time Jimin knew where he was and why. Jungkook also began rebuilding his relationship with the memories he had lost. Some returned slowly, some never did, but he stopped treating his missing memories as something he needed to fear. He realized he didn't need to remember every second to know what mattered. One evening, several months later, Jimin and Jungkook returned to the apartment where everything had begun. Rain was falling softly outside. Jimin stood near the same window where he had watched Jungkook leave 3 years earlier. The room looked different now, warmer, brighter. The old wooden box sat on the table. Inside were the photographs, letters, and the silver key. Jungkook walked toward him carrying 2 cups of coffee. Jimin smiled. "You still remember how I take it?" Jungkook raised an eyebrow. "After everything we've survived, you think I'd forget your coffee order?" Jimin laughed softly. "Maybe you forgot." "I forgot some things." Jungkook placed the cup in his hand. "But not you." Jimin looked down at the coffee, his eyes filled with tears. "I was so cruel to you that night." Jungkook became quiet. "You were terrified. I told you to leave. You thought I would die if you didn't. I still regret it." Jungkook stepped closer. "So do I." Jimin looked at him. "You regret leaving?" "No." Jungkook touched his cheek. "I regret that you believed you had to make that choice alone." Jimin closed his eyes as Jungkook's thumb brushed away a tear. "If I could go back." "Don't." "Why?" "Because if we keep trying to rewrite the past, we'll miss what we have now." Jimin smiled through his tears. "You're right." Jungkook leaned his forehead against Jimin's. "I spent 3 years thinking you didn't love me anymore. I spent 3 years pretending I didn't." "Which one was harder?" Jimin laughed quietly. "Pretending." Jungkook smiled. "Then don't pretend anymore." Jimin wrapped his arms around him. For a long moment neither spoke. There was no threat waiting behind the door, no mysterious phone call, no hidden photograph, no reason to run, only the sound of rain and the steady heartbeat beneath Jimin's hand. "Jungkook, if you ever think I'm pushing you away again, I'll ask why, and if I don't answer, I'll stay until you do." Jimin smiled. "You really are stubborn. You love that about me." "I still do." Jungkook kissed his forehead. "Then we're okay." Jimin looked toward the window. The city lights shimmered through the rain. 3 years earlier, he had watched Jungkook disappear behind that same curtain of water and believed their story was over. Now Jungkook stood beside him again. The past could not be erased. The pain could not be undone. They could not reclaim the birthdays, mornings, anniversaries, and ordinary moments they had lost, but they could choose what happened next. Jimin took Jungkook's hand and intertwined their fingers. "No more secrets." Jungkook squeezed his hand. "No more running. No more telling each other to leave. Never again." Jimin smiled. The scar left by their separation would always exist, but it no longer felt like an open wound. It had become proof that they had survived something powerful enough to break them and still found their way back to each other. Their fathers had arranged a meeting. Circumstances had created a first conversation. Fear had created their breakup. But nothing had forced Jimin to love Jungkook. Nothing had forced Jungkook to return. That part had always belonged to them. And as the rain slowly faded outside, Jimin finally understood the truth he had been too afraid to believe 3 years earlier. Sometimes love is not about never losing someone. Sometimes love is about finding your way back after everything has tried to make you forget. Jimin had once told Jungkook to leave and forget. He had believed forgetting was the only way to save him. But in the end, Jungkook did the opposite. He remembered, he searched, he returned. And when Jimin finally opened the door again, there was no goodbye waiting between them, only a second chance. Only the quiet promise of two people who had lost years but refused to lose the rest of their lives. The rain stopped completely. Jimin looked at Jungkook and smiled. "Stay." Jungkook held his hand tighter. "I'm not going anywhere." And this time Jimin believed him.